Hello, good evening. I would like to talk today about this medicine, Xiao Chai Hu Tang. It means small Chaihu formula. Chaihu is a herb, Chinese herb, which looks like a handful of twigs, and the effect of it is remarkable. And I intend to make a video just on the handful of twigs to describe its individual functions. However, usually in Chinese medicine we use a series. We don't use herbal medicines one by one, we use them combined. And the reason we use them combined is each one of them has some useful properties and some other properties that may not be so useful. So we use them together in order to get the useful properties of each and also cancel out the not useful properties. So let's say if we have a medicine that's very calming but it's very cooling, in order to avoid the side effects of too much cooling, we could add something warming, like ginseng, for example. Anyway, that gets very complicated, and I like to keep this as simple as I can. So this is a very ancient combination. Was first written down in 256 AD, I think, so nearly 2,000 years ago, and has been in continuous use for all that period of time. So tens of millions of people have taken this formula, and originally it was for a specific kind of cold. If you catch a cold or malaria, a specific symptom which is alternating cold and fever. So I don't know if you've ever had a cold. I hope you've never had malaria, but I don't know if you've ever had an ordinary cold or flu in which you don't feel chills and you don't feel fever, but you feel both. Or rather, you don't feel them one by one, you feel both, sometimes chills, sometimes fever. I'd never had this in my life until quite recently, and I had a cold and I took paracetamol and my temperature came down and I thought that's great. But in fact, what then subsequently happened is that I started to have chills and fever. And when I was having chills and fever alternating, paracetamol no longer worked. But this stuff, I suddenly remembered I had some of this. I took a single dose and it worked like a dream, and everything stopped. And I was cured of this flu or cold in a single dose. So the original purpose of this formula was that, but over the hundreds of years, it's also been used for different things. And this is the most commonly prescribed formula in Japan. Out of all of the herbal formulas, we have hundreds of them. This is the most commonly prescribed. Why? Well, how do we know? Because of insurance records in Japan. Record who takes what. Why is it the most popular? It's not because everyone in Japan is catching malaria or having colds and alternating cold and fever. It's because this is often used now for depression, anxiety, depression, for example. So, which is more of a problem for modern people than ancient people. For ancient people, epidemic diseases were the number one killer. Nowadays, for modern people, depression and anxiety is often the number one thing that diminishes quality of life for people. So I'm going to go through the ingredients. There are not many of them. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 ingredients. Some of them will be familiar to you from your kitchen cabinet. Some of the others are exotic and only found in Chinese pharmacies, and you will not have heard of them. So the first one is, and the main one is Chaihu. It's the handful of twigs I mentioned, the magical handful of twigs. It's for lifting up depression and anxiety, lifting up. When you see someone who's depressed, they often look like this. And when you see someone who's confident and happy, they often look like this. So this gives you the idea of, in Chinese medicine they say, the stagnation of the body's energy that leads to depression is a malfunction of the energy which is supposed to go up and out. So when you're happy, you're up and out, and when you're depressed, you're down and in. So that's Chaihu. Bansha, I beg your pardon, Huangqin. The next one is Huangqin. Huangqin is for removing heat. So when we get, according to Chinese medicine, when we get psychologically depressed, we also get heat accumulates in the body, often in the heart and the lungs. It makes us feel worse. It's one of the reasons our chest closes up when we feel depressed. Sometimes we try to sigh and we can't sigh. So that's heat, Huangqin. Chaihu Huangqin, Bansha. Bansha is normally for, the name of it literally means half summer. Why, I don't know. But usually it's used for phlegm, if we have a lot of phlegm. But in this formula it's not used for phlegm, it's used for nausea. Nausea, but also burping, nausea, because oftentimes when people get mentally uncomfortable, they also have digestive symptoms, hiccups, nausea, vomiting, that kind of thing. So that's for that. Now all the rest of them you will be familiar with. There's shengjiang. Shengjiang just means fresh ginger. Also useful for nausea and also for protecting the stomach from the effects of psychological, sort of IBS type psychological digestive problems. Renshen is ginger, ginseng. Renshen is ginseng. It's good for energy, it's good for many things, also good for the stomach. Gansao is licorice, just licorice. It's good for the stomach and good for the whole body's energy. The last one is dazao. Dazao is red dates, Chinese dates, red dates. They're like normal dates, the fruit, but they're red. Now, each Chinese herbal formula contains some warming herbs and some cooling herbs, usually. So, Chaihu and Huangqin are cooling. Huangqin is quite cooling. Chaihu is slightly cooling. The others are all warming. So that means you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you've got 5 warming substances and 2 cooling substances, and they're not very cooling. So overall, it's quite a warming formula. So that means that if a patient has a lot of heat, depression and anxiety with heat, then this is not necessarily the best thing for them, unless we modify it. But when we take these in pill form, we can't usually modify it. So we have to be very precise in choosing the formula for the patient, otherwise they can end up with side effects. So some people say herbal medicine can't cause side effects. That's completely wrong, unless it's too weak to cause any effects, which is quite common with the stuff you buy in Holland and Barrett, for example. The doses are very, very low because they're afraid of causing side effects and getting sued. Whereas if the dose is very, very low, it may not work, but they don't get sued. So that's their main priority. But this stuff is strong, good quality. So if it's wrongly prescribed, it will cause side effects. So in this case, if the patient has a lot of heat, it's possible that this can make them more agitated, more hot. So we'd have to give something else, probably something like Jiawei Xiaoyaosan. I have made a video about that. I will put a link in it somewhere in this video. But yeah, that's it really. But if it's suited to the patient, the problem with Jiawei Xiaoyaosan, the one that clears more heat, is it doesn't contain ginseng. It contains something similar to ginseng but weaker. But that one, well, it's very complicated. So let's just say, if the patient is more tired, if their tongue is not so red, this Jiawei Xiaoyaosan, Xiao Chai Hu Tang is better. If the patient is not so tired and has a lot of heat, they should use Jiawei Xiaoyaosan. I myself, usually when I get a bit busy and a bit agitated and a bit uncomfortable, I usually take Jiawei Xiaoyaosan, the one, because I produce quite a lot of heat. So I usually take that one. This one is a little bit hot for me. I've been taking this lately. It's a bit hot, but for a lot of other people it might be perfect.